Hi, my name is Bonnie Waslick, and I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusive Excellence, and Belonging here at Penn State Abington. And we are joined today by Dr. Nirmala Erevelles at the University of Alabama. And she's going to speak with us a little bit today about general points and ideas that she would want faculty to think about in terms of disability studies.
The first thing I wanted to really talk about is the ways in which higher education conceives of disability. Because from disability studies is a field that sees disability as something that's central to our understanding of difference. Actually, that extends beyond the actual, say, embodied, as well as, intellectual notions of disability, to go beyond to think about the ways in which it also structures issues of race, class, gender, sexuality, age. So in many ways, disability is very central to the logic of the ways in which higher educational institutions are organized. In fact, when we talk about inclusion in higher education, the irony is that higher education is organized around the active exclusion of those we think are unable to be part of the institution. Notice during college admissions times that institutions celebrate the ways in which we have high or low acceptance rates because that gives them status. So the very logic of higher education is based on the exclusion of disability. So I want us to name that as something that a lot of us in higher education don't really think about. So when we start naming it in such a way, then we can also understand the many ways in which we have subtle and not so subtle resistances to disabled people being on campus. And that's the tricky part. Because when we talk about the ways in which we include students, on the basis of race, class, and gender, like the assumption is that we open it up for more possibility, like we open up the capacity for people to be part of this institution. We're not always done a good job. It's a work in progress, but we are attempting to do that. With disability, we are hit with, oh my God, do these groups of people actually fit at an institution? And so we also use what I'm going to argue is I'm going to use concepts that we may not have heard before, ableist practices and ableist language to, in many ways, keep disabled students as if they are second-class citizens at the university. For example, now when I use the word ableism, I'm really talking about the history of, yes, disability has a history, so that's going to be like news, but disability has a history, the history of institutions, both within higher education, definitely in K-12 institutions, but also in society, of producing structures and practices that exclude disabled people. Like we don't think of things in everyday life that are exclusive of people. Like an example of ableism is just a simple example, the one that we all get, the one that we also know that we can correct very easily, is when there's stairs in front of a door. People can't get in. It's the structure. Person using a wheelchair has actually the capacity to move around. A wheelchair is an enhancing instrument, right? It's a technology, just like glasses or anything else that we use. So for us to be able to function in our world, but a set of stairs makes that impossible. In disability, within ableism, we talk about, that's what we call the social model of disability, which as opposed to the medical model, where the medical model is the one that constructs disability as if there's something wrong with disabled people and they have to be corrected, normalized, or I could use the word abled in order for them to be able to participate in society. The social model of society says all body minds, and I'm using body minds because I'm not talking just about physical disabilities, but also intellectual disabilities and also, mental disabilities, anxiety, panic attacks, and stuff like that. Like our body minds are different. And in what ways do the social contexts in which we live and work and are supposed to thrive in not do not provide us access to these contexts. Now, I'm using another word here that we seldom use in higher education. We talk around the context of disability. So I'm going to just say that again. I'm using another word that we usually use in higher education that we don't use in higher education to talk about how we include disabled people, students. We always use the word accommodation. There is something patronizing about the word accommodation in the ways in which we are including disabled people in conversations. Here, the disabled person has to go to an office of disability services, do a whole bunch of paperwork to prove, to get a kind of stamp or certification that they're truly, desperately in need of help, and that there is a plea in there for the faculty member or their colleagues or the institution itself to accommodate them. It's the kind of tension we have when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about tolerating diversity and celebrating it. Accommodation talks about toleration. Access, on the other hand, puts the onus of accessibility or inclusion on the institutions and all the staff, the faculty, colleagues within the institution, the people who make up the institution, to make it a space that is inclusive of different body minds. So access is also, in some ways, you could think of it as a kind of like rights-based language that ensures that every student in higher education has the right to be included based on their needs, all of which do not have to necessarily be certified through a medical establishment. And the reason I say this is because it's become a practice among some of us disability studies scholars. When we are doing our syllabus, like we always have the disability statement of where people need to go to the disability study office, and I always have that there. But we know that disability does not just generally happen because you can predict it. Sometimes students can have a temporary disability. You break your leg, you have mono, you have like things where you cannot come to class. You don't need extra certification. So I leave a different statement on my syllabus to say, if you have any need that prevents your access, and I give them examples of several needs, come and talk to me and we can work together to make it possible for you to participate meaningfully in my class. Now, I will use disability services to help with the technologies that I may need.
Of course.
Like transcribing this interview that we are doing right now, like, providing a screen reader if somebody has having problems with eyesight, getting a note taker, having a sign language interpreter, offering different ways of providing notes for students, allowing laptops and iPads in the classroom because some students need the technology to be able to do this work. These are all what I call, some of us, and giving students extra time for exams, sometimes taking away the anxiety of exams and offering them other ways to do this work.
Sure.
The reason I kind of like, I'm giving us these examples, all of these, ironically and interestingly, don't just, and I'm putting in quotes because it's negatively, accommodate disabled students, but they actually provide access to all students. And so accessibility becomes more an issue of social justice than a kind of benevolent favor we do for a particular population. Notice that when you have notes, when you have transcripts of films, when you have, closed captions, when you're helping students for whom English is also a second language.
Absolutely.
So it's not that it's just good, like how many of you have watched a film where, there's an accent like mine is right now, and you would appreciate that there are some words that are transcribed that you would know what they are. So it offers a space that's open. Anxiety is not, a lot of students may not be formally identified as having anxiety. They may not have 504 plans, but they would benefit from a little extra time. Maybe how do you, so for me, the issue of disability, so what I am, and the logic that I am making with this argument is then that we need to think about not just this, but the different ways in which universities are, I won't say knowingly, maybe inadvertently, but there's a bit of knowing too, structured around this notion of ableism.
Absolutely.
Because of the way because of the ways in which it becomes structured, the same way we've talked about issues of racism as opposed to individual acts of prejudice, right? How things get structured to, and then there is to exclude. And then there is another part to the argument is when we do these arguments on disability, we also presume, and this is the hard part for most people to accept, that we also presume that most disabled subjects are white, they're middle and upper class, and they have access to the kinds of services that can enable them to quote unquote get certified. So there's race, there's class, and there's also like gendered issues around how we see them as disabled or non-disabled, because a majority of students, if you look around at who has access to disability services, a lot of times students of color, especially at universities around the issue of the 504 plans, very rarely get them because it requires that families have to prove in the school systems and then at the universities that their children need these services. And a lot of times health insurance and other things do not cover these things. Yeah. Also, with the history of the ways in which students of color are treated in public schooling, they're usually there is what you call an imbalance in classification. So in K-12 settings, students with certain kinds of academic difficulties, if you're students of color, you're mostly classified as having mild intellectual disabilities or being constituted as emotionally disturbed or behaviorally conflicted, these are terms that are used. These are official terms. And so these students seldom make it to college, whereas predominantly white students with similar issues, upper class white students, because working class white students also suffer this fate, upper class white students have access to psychologists and counselors who are able to certify these students as having needs. The power of a 504 plan is, and if you haven't heard, it's the paperwork that students use. It follows you both from all the way from K-12 all the way to your entire life, right? It was actually a civil rights legislation. It's more than an IEP. The power of the 504 plan is it requires that students receive accommodations. I'm using it in that context because of how it's worded within classroom spaces. They have rights to be included.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you don't have if you're an IEP, that is actually used as a point of exclusion in academics because you're academically not able to be part of this, or you're behaviorally not part of this. Whereas a 504 plan also, if you have a panic attack or you just have an issue in a classroom, the 504 plan will explain that it is because of your disability that this happened. And so you need to be understood within the broader context of the impairments that you have to negotiate in a classroom. So that's the other important thing for us to understand, that when students are so many of our students may not have access to may not have literally access to accessibilities, to play on the word, because they will not be able to get the official sanctioning for academic needs. And if universities are really committed then to issues of student success, and that I put that in quotes, we have to also be thoughtful about what success means, then we really need to look in a broad disability. This understanding of how ableism works helps us then think through the ways in which we can make student success, broadly speaking, accessible for all students, no matter whether they have a label or not.
Well, you have given us a lot to chew on and really important points to not only think about for ourselves as educators, but also I think for our broader campus community. So I want to thank you so much for your time in advance for the resource that you're pulling together for us. This is an amazing opportunity, I think, for us all to be able to sit and learn with you. So it's so greatly appreciated. Thank you for your work on your campus and then more broadly in the field of critical disability studies.